Hi, and welcome back. So Harry Potter and the Theory of Attachment. We're still on book 6, The Half-Blood Prince, and we're on those last chapters 25 through 30. So we're at the end of the book. Last time we talked a little bit about trust and dissociation, and kind of how dissociation might be protective or even productive in some aspects. And what that definition of trust looks like for each of us too. So we're gonna keep heading on as we go into Bowlby's stages of grief. So Bowlby's stages of grief, it's how someone moves through the grief cyclical stages is strongly informed by their pre-existing attachment internalizations. And so just to go through those stages, the first would be shock and numbness, then yearning and searching, then despair and disorganization, and then finally reorganization and recovery. Going into some criticisms of them, we'll do that a little bit more here in a second, but the main ones that I wanted to make sure that we get to are kind of how grief has changed evolutionarily, because at first I feel like we were just trying to name what might be happening for a person, so that way you can recognize it, because once you recognize it, it maybe provides a little bit of comfort to be like, oh, this is where they are. But whenever it starts to say that it needs to happen in this linear way, that can get dicey because grief happens differently. It's almost like a fingerprint for people is what we're discovering more and more. Everybody's going to experience this slightly differently. So to say that there are stages and then to be as bold to say that people are going to go through them in a certain order might be a little off, but we do think that this is still extremely useful to know about. So we're going to go into those stages now. And I'm going to let you guys speak a little bit more to that.
I'll say just two things. First, we live in a really grief intolerant culture. We live in a culture that says if you do not feel good all the time, then there's something wrong. Whereas the reality is grief is a part of life. Loss is a part of life. And if you look at the way that our brain is built, there are networks that do relationship. This would be in the subcortical area. There are networks that do relationship, being in relationship, caring and nurturing. And actually, when you see the firing of the care, and then you look at firing and grief experiences, it's so wrapped around each other, the anatomy, that it almost looks like the exact same parts of your brain are firing because they're so intertwined. You can't be in love and connection without the ability to grieve when that is lost, because eventually it will be.
Oh, that's a beautiful poetic sentence you ended on there. Yeah, that reminds me of the importance of remembering that the brain is a predictive organ, that its whole function is to try and anticipate what's next in order to help us be safe and navigate the moment. And it's part of why grief is so confounding, is because that relational part of you is now looking for that person. If we're talking about the grief by losing a human, a person or an animal, that you're then looking forward to, or I'm going to call, or I should ask, or in the other room is, and then you have to assault that process with the reality that that can't be followed through on. And it's grief is that really painful process of having to replace an old prediction with a new prediction regarding what's been lost. And it just even feels heavy to think about that. We should also say, Bowlby developed these stages with another man with the last name Parks. So Bowlby and Parks went on to write about these things, and I think they evolved them over time. What's interesting is these stages of grief, I think, came out like 8 or 10 years before Kubler-Ross. But really, the psychological world latched on to Kubler-Ross's, and hers were a little more nuanced. She brings in like names anger as part of it, whereas and in this Bowlby Parks stages, they would say in the yearning and searching, there can be some anger, some depression. In the despair, disorganization, there can be anger, depression. She a little bit more delineates certain things where they group them differently.
Okay, so we also wanted to give you guys just another example of what a definition of grief might be. So an instinctive universal response to separation, very short and clean. We're all programmed to attach. To experience the death of a loved one, a person is absolutely faced with the pain and struggle of detaching from that person. This detaching and the pain that we feel is what we all know as grief. It is because we have attached that we experience grief when a death or loss occurs. Yeah, I feel like this is a beautiful, I know this isn't the last book or the end, but I think grief is just, it almost feels like the end of attachment. Like I mean, that's what it's saying in this quote, is that this is where that attachment happens and has to happen, like that this is part of the natural progress. Like I think Jami Lynn said it very well, so if you need to rewind, feel free. But yeah.
Well, Roger Solomon says that when we lose someone and we finally kind of accomplish the detaching from their concrete experience, we're then open to reattaching to the memory of them in a little bit more kind of spiritual, mystical way, that the attachment transforms and it lets go of the concrete and moves to the symbolic. And I like thinking of that.
Yes. Oh man, it's in book 7, but there's a beautiful quote in book 7. I will not say it because we do not skip ahead, but what I will say is my supervisor, the person who really taught me most of what I know about therapy, always says that grief and love are the same thing. And it's true, because if you love something, when it's gone, you will grieve it.
Yeah.
I'm getting feelings. I don't like it.
Yeah.
Well, and I think to kind of go a little bit into Bowlby's stages, like just a little bit more to like maybe track through an example, like whenever someone is experiencing grief, they're going to start off with that shock and numbness. They're going to not like want to believe that it happened, which might go into that denial piece if you're a Kubler-Ross person. And then what I like about these stages too is that this yearning and searching, that might look like bargaining, but I like these words a little bit more personally, that you're longing for the connection that you had there somewhere else, or like just trying to find it, even if it's not in another relationship, like you're still looking for it, but it's not your keys. You can't get it back. And so there's just this despair that it leads into, or maybe disorganization, and how do I make meaning of the grief that I'm experiencing. And that's one of the things that I really take away from Bowlby's stages of grief more than other grief work, and something that I think it hits really well is that whenever a person has made meaning of the experience of this loss, that's whenever reorganization and recovery can occur. But in order for them to make meaning, they need these other stages. And so it's not that we have to force someone to get to this last place. In fact, you might not hit all of them, but that is what might be helpful, is to find meaning in the loss. But just to kind of go through as an example, in case you were wondering what that looks like.
It is. I would want to remember to insert compassion into every one of those.
Yeah.
that the reason that we go numb is so compassionate. It's such a gift, and the searching again, like it's how beautiful of a process. So just holding a degree of tenderness and gentleness with ourselves and the people near us as they're doing every one of those really important works.
Yeah. Okay.
No.
Yeah. So now we're going into helping with grief.
People are bad at this.
We are culturally really bad at it.
So things that can help with grief, to reassure and normalize the grief, make sure that people know that this is an experience that everyone shares, encourage dialogue about the deceased. So talking about the person, encourage rituals and memorialization that can help with that meaning making piece, help clients find other ways to attach. So that might be a community or another person, but not ever forcing any of this. This should be like ultimately when the client is ready, they will do these things. So I think it's important to recognize like this isn't the checklist for you to have in your therapy room. These are just things that have helped other people and might not help everybody. And then the last one is to help clients to cope with recurring grief. So grief isn't something that ends after, oh, it's been 7 years, so guess I can set this on the shelf and never look at it again. No, that's not the way grief works. It might ebb and flow, come in waves, specifically at anniversaries, or sometimes you'll just, have that coffee that you used to always have with them and you're right back with them. And I think some of the most powerful meaning making can come from whenever you recognize that as, oh, this is my love for them showing up.
Around the world, there are some beautiful ways that people help each other hold grief. I'm thinking about things like Dia de los Muertos and having ofrendas for family members. I'm thinking about how Jewish people will sit for 7 days. I'm thinking about how in certain cultures you wear a specific color for a period of time to show that you've lost someone.
Yeah.
And it's not really something we do here in the US culturally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't want to remember. We don't want to stay with.
Right.
And those are the two things I would add to this list, I think, is step one is be present. Just stay with, be near. And then the other one is then don't forget. Like, whether we're talking about a loved one who's lost someone important to them or a client, we then wake up the next day and it's not top of mind. And they don't get that luxury. And then they start feeling really forgotten. And so just remembering is so healing for other people.
Yeah. Some of my favorite cultural grief moments are cultures that literally will just scream. I think that's like just so beautiful to like let it out. I know it's probably not beautiful in the moment, but that's something that I think is just so powerful, is maybe a better word than beautiful. And then the other one that I thought of is lanterns. People will release lanterns, and usually in like weddings, all the lanterns will be released at once. But for grief or like funerals, they'll release them one at a time from family members. So you'll just see almost like a line of lanterns, which is how you know that it's for a funeral procession instead. And I think that really speaks to what I was thinking earlier of like grief as a fingerprint. Like whenever you're grieving somebody, it's one at a time. It's different for everybody. And it can get really complex. So more group discussion questions for you guys. So once again, these will be available to you whenever we meet, but we wanted to give these to you now so that you could start thinking about how they might impact these last chapters of the book. So we've got, where do Bowlby's stages of grief shock and numbness, yearning and searching, despair and disorganization, reorganization and recovery show up in these chapters. What is grieved and lost in these chapters? Where have we seen grief show up throughout the first 6 books? And how has grief changed throughout these books?
And we don't only have to think about losing people. It can also be thinking about loss of self and some of that. So I'll be interested to see where this moves people.
Yeah, or even lots of stuff too. I mean, it can be a broom, or it can be, I don't know. There's so many places that we can go with this. So excited to talk to you guys about it. See y'all soon.